What's going on? Today we're going to talk about the Jesus Revolution film. I actually recently saw it in theaters. I want to give you some of my thoughts about it, and I want to show you some cool clips from the trailer, and then if you haven't seen it yet, and we're going to look at what actually Greg Laurie says about the film, and it's different than what you might expect from a Christian film, and that's why I'm really excited to talk about this today. So this was a great clip that came off of TikTok. This was Pastor's Podcast. Shout out to them for this clip. Let's take a look.
Surprising about this film is it is the most unchristian Christian film I've ever seen that has more gospel. Let me explain. Christian films are often cheesy. They're too tidy. They're too neat. They're not reflective of real life. So this is a film that's made by believers telling a real story of what happened in the life of Chuck Smith and a young hippie evangelist named Lonnie Frisbee, sort of how nitro met glycerin and this explosion happened. That was the Jesus movement. It's also the story of a young Greg Laurie and Kathy Martin then, before we got married, and it's our love story. There's a scene in the film where my character, played by Joel Courtney, goes into the water and meets the hippie evangelist Lonnie Frisbee, and Lonnie asks Greg, have you decided yet about Christ? And Greg says, not yet. And Lonnie says, do you want to right now? And he leads Greg in a prayer. And I actually worked with the actor Jonathan Rumi, who plays Lonnie and also plays Jesus in The Chosen, and we went over this, like how I would pray with the person. We wanted it to be real, not fake sounding like these things are in movies so often. And Jonathan just understood it, and he kind of absorbed it. And then when he did it in his performance, it's so believable. And then Greg is baptized. It's a very dramatic moment, I think.
Yeah, that was one of the best moments in the film. Here's the trailer right here. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it. I'll just skip through it a little bit, but it's really cool. It talks about the Jesus Revolution, the Jesus People movement that happened here in Southern California. Crazy side note is Greg Laurie's mom that you see in this film is actually my grandma's sister. So it's cool. There's some family relation. I don't know if you know, but I grew up with a family in ministry. My grandfather started, the Fred Jordan Missions, a homeless shelter on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles for the homeless. And I grew up in ministry, guys. So, and that's I'll have to talk about that sometime. But there's Pastor Chuck Smith, who founded Calvary Chapel, one of the largest church movements, in America. And you see, this is Lonnie, who's the guy who plays The Chosen, right? Him right there. He was very charismatic, or kind of Pentecostal, very moved spirit. And then Chuck Smith was very, not saying he wasn't moving with the spirit, but obviously he was. But very, we got to look at God's word. They were a good mix, right, between the spirit and truth, basically. And it shows what happens, right? This Chuck Smith basically was like, this was during the hippie era, right? Where people were like, oh, these hippies, they're all on drugs, free love, all this kind of stuff. And people in mainstream churches didn't want to have anything to do with the hippies or their music or anything like that, right? Even Christians, right? And which is funny because Jesus came to the world to seek and save the lost. Jesus didn't come for all the good two shoes that sit in church, that tithe, and that act all perfectly. Not even. Jesus came for everyone, but Jesus didn't come for basically the Pharisees, right? The people who think they don't need Jesus. Jesus came for the people who are helpless, right? That's why it's good for all of us to always realize the need we have for God, for Jesus, right? So super cool. You see some of the stuff right here, reactions from people in the church about, the hippies attending. And it just shows, I like it because it shows a lot of different things. It shows Pastor Greg's life, with him becoming saved, right? And then it shows, not all was easy during this time in this movement, right? Some congregants realized that, we need to love these people and make a home for them. And that's how Calvary Chapel really exploded, because there was such a need at that time for people to seek and save these people that are lost, people to show these people Jesus Christ and not just shut their church doors like so many others were doing. Things sort of fell apart at the end with Lonnie and Pastor Chuck Smith, but it really was an incredible movie. Honestly, I cried so many times during this movie, and it made me just be like, man, there's something so powerful. I don't know how long you've been a Christian, and if you're not a Christian, then you definitely check out my video on how to get to heaven, because it's really important, and you don't know if you have tomorrow to live. But if you've been a Christian for a while, we take our salvation so for granted, right? Not all of us, and I'm generalizing, but a lot of times we're just so used to being Christians. We go to church on the weekends, we have Christian friends, maybe family, and we just live in our Christian bubble, and we forget how Jesus took us basically from dead to life, and that transformation that takes place in our life. And what I really liked was seeing Pastor Greg's transformation. It's funny to call him pastor since I guess I'm related to him, but to see the transformation of the gospel in his life from doing drugs and being lost, and he had like a really tumultuous upbringing, right? To seeing him meet God at one of these church services, right? And how the gospel and the Holy Spirit changed him, and how once he really met Jesus, because our culture right now is struggling. I think like it's very parallels our culture now to like the hippie era, the 70s, where people are lost. They don't know what their identity is in, and people are searching, right? So it's important for us to be a light to those who might look different than us. And if you have, I'm sick of like everyone, and Christians especially, getting into like, I'm a conservative or Republican camp. Okay, yeah. Most likely, if you follow Jesus, you should have conservative values in the sense of biblically. And a lot of times most Christians are, I don't want to say most, but a lot of them are Republican because they believe in protecting life in the womb and a lot of Christian values. Now, of course, no person who's ever going to get elected is going to really be anyone, right, that is going to represent Jesus. Only Jesus represents Jesus, right? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So when we vote people in, we're voting to see who has more, who really believes more in the biblical truths that represent us, right, than the other person, right? Because sometimes it's like the lesser of two evils. That's just a little side note about that. But it's important for us to vote for people who stand up for even religious freedom and things like that. Because if Christians don't go vote and stuff, we're going to end up in communist China. But that's a side note. What was I even saying with that? But what I'm getting at with all this is that we can't sit in our two little camps, right? Oh, you're a Democrat, or oh, you're a Republican. Like, we're supposed to be outside of all that even to begin with, and be like, we need to be around people who are hurting and lost. Like, I believe your closest friends, right? You should, they should be believers and stuff, right? Because it's so easy to get lost with the cares of the world and to get sucked into darkness, right? So it's important to have a strong community of believers and be plugged into church and all of that. But it's important for us too to, if we see someone who, say they're gay, or say they're living a lifestyle we don't condone of, we're not supposed to say, hey, you're going to hell. We're supposed to just be like, hey, can I sit down and just have lunch with you? And then they're going to eventually find out that you're a Christian. And then, why do you believe that? And they say, well, I believe this because this is my testimony. And share to them what God's done in your life. One of the greatest things I think we could do is just share a testimony. Hey, I was lost and I met Jesus and now I'm found. I was blind and now I could see, right? And that's something that's so beautiful in this movement, in this film. You see a generation that's lost, and you see revival taking place because people, Christians, right? Like Pastor Chuck, Pastor Greg, and Lonnie, people willing to be like Jesus and seek and save those who are lost and go to the places that no one wants to go, like that homeless person sitting there on the street. So it was a really incredible film. I would highly recommend it to anyone, and we need to go and support as many Christian films and artists and musicians as we can, because where our treasure is, that's where our heart is as well. So if we're just watching junk all day long on Netflix and stuff, that's not building us up in the spirit. That's not getting us closer to God, right? But watching stuff like this, it is in a way, so highly recommend this film. I cried a lot through it, but it inspires you to trust in God for another revival. And it makes you want to go tell people about Jesus and share your faith. And it just realizes how lucky we are to have found God. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you want access to this private live stream where this video was filmed, this uncut version with Q&As, and you want to join my Discord server, Bible studies, all of that, head down to my Patreon below. Thank you so much for watching.